It's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Charlie Liberman, my remarkable teacher and mentor. Charlie's a Harvardian who spent his entire career at Massachusetts A&R, which is more than half a century. So it's a fitting coincidence that he celebrated his birthday just a couple of days ago. Happy birthday, Charlie. Charlie's approach can be described as concision in style, precision in thought, decision in life. These are the words of a French writer, Victor Hugo, who is most well known in this country for his book, Les Misérables. Victor Hugo was 22 when Massachusetts A&R was founded, and Charlie was about the same age when he first set foot into that building. So Charlie, the podium is all yours.
Well, thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here. I was raised in an academic household. As you can see here, my mother was a pioneer in the study of dyslexia, and my father was a pioneer in the study of speech processing. And so I was immersed in science from a very young age, at least from my father. Here's a picture of him and me, probably about 1960. I'm pretty sure I was the only 9 or 10-year-old who understood the form and structure of vowels and could read speech spectrograms. My parents' love of science got me hooked at an early age, as you can see from this essay that I brought home and my mom saved, because she saved absolutely everything that we brought home from school. You can also see that I had a great flair for writing. In 1971, as a senior at Harvard College, I decided to merge my love of science with my long-standing love of music in the study of hearing. But there weren't any hearing courses at Harvard, where I was an undergraduate, so I asked my neurobiology teacher, who was David Hubel, who went on to get a Nobel Prize, would he sponsor me for an independent study where we might read the original literature and I'd learn about hearing and deafness. And he said, well, you really ought to go talk to this guy named Nelson Kiang. So I contacted Nelson and asked him if he would be willing to mentor me in an independent study. So I went to see him. At this point in time, the Eaton Peabody lab was temporarily over at MIT. That's where this picture was taken. I met him. He gave me a copy of his classic 1965 book on auditory nerve response in cats and said, come back next week and we'll see if you're worthy. So I went away and I read the book and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I came back the next week, and I don't think he actually asked me anything about the book. What he asked me was if I was Al Liberman's son. And I said, yeah, I am Al Liberman's son. And he shook his head and he said, really sloppy scientist. But he took me on for an independent study nonetheless. But I definitely knew I was dealing with a different kind of mentor than we've perhaps heard described today. Over the course of that year, I studied the original literature. This was 1971. I wanted to learn about cochlear physiology. There were probably about 25 papers that had been written about cochlear physiology in 1971. Maybe it was more than that, but one could essentially read everything that was written. So my assignment was to go off and read papers, come back and talk to Nelson about it. And so every week I would dutifully troop in, and he would dress me down and criticize my critical reading skills. But as time went on, I began to kind of understand where he was coming from, and I got better at one of the key skills that I learned from him, which was understanding the difference between observation and interpretation. And it really is a lot harder than you might expect if you've never really worked at it. I mean, it was all very brutal, but I did think I was making progress, and by the end of the year, I summarized a lot of my work in a senior thesis that was on a topic that I thought might be relevant to what I was going to do my PhD thesis on. And like I said, and Nelson had invited me to apply to become his graduate student, so I thought I must be doing okay. And so I was a little bit shocked to see his assessment of my thesis. There is evidence of some thinking, although the writing is not as lucid as it might have been. Few signs of exceptional creativity. But there are some positive things in there, and I know now that actually on a Nelson scale, this is a rave review. So, 1972, I was accepted into the physiology department to be Nelson's graduate student, and so since 1972, I've been trooping up and down the stairs here to the 4th floor of the hospital, working on neurophysiology and neuroanatomy of the peripheral auditory system. For the first 25 of those years or so, Nelson was the director, but then about halfway through that period, I was fortunate enough to be selected his replacement, so I became the director of Eaton Peabody Lab. And Nelson made himself scarce, which was appreciated. And importantly, during most of that time, Joe Nadal was the chair. And Joe, I will always be eternally grateful for your mentorship, your support, and your friendship. It was tremendously important to me in those days, and still is. So when I took over as director, I couldn't resist the opportunity to roast Nelson at his retirement party. And as many of you know, he has a history of giving books to people when they leave the lab. So I went to the bookstore and got a bunch of self-help books, which I thought were relevant to his unique mentoring style, including this one. But seriously, it really is clear that Nelson's approach would not survive HR scrutiny today. Absolutely no question about it. However, it's not 100% clear that that's a good thing, I have to say. In the final analysis, to me, his relentlessly frank feedback was important. He was usually correct, and that kind of feedback, I believe, was really critical in building the culture of research excellence and integrity that made EPL and continues to make it the premier research organization that it is today. As director, I've tried to carry on many of the less brutal principles that Chiang aspired to as enunciated in this credo that he wrote a long time ago, and I actually recently unearthed. I'd kind of forgotten that it existed. But I just want to point out a couple of the pieces of this. The first being, every person in the laboratory has equal standing in the search for truth. Nelson was all about the search for truth. He fervently believed that, and he fervently believed in a very non-hierarchical organization. It really was true that everybody at all levels of the organization, from technicians to the youngest trainees to junior faculty, was encouraged to challenge whatever anybody was saying. And you know, as a child of the 60s, questioning authority certainly came very naturally to me, but I think really the most important aspect of what I learned from him was questioning your own authority. He always said, be your worst critic. really be critical of your work and ask yourself, are you really sure about the things you think you're sure about, and what really is the evidence for that? And I've carried that with me ever since. The other thing I'd like to call attention to is this statement: proper communal spirit is evidenced by free exchange of ideas and information without regard for individual gain. So I've often said that the thing that really made our department great and the environment great was we had a lot of big brains and small egos. And over the years, I've had occasion to visit, I would say, every ENT department that has any kind of a research presence. And I am sure that there is really no place that matches the incredible spirit of collegiality and collaboration and cooperation that we have here, and many other. Some may come close, and some may match it, but none surpass it, and many are far inferior in that regard. A number of years ago, I was inspired to sort of show that more quantitatively. I had to write a grant application for an infrastructure grant for which collaboration was an important part of the deal, and so that was in 2011, and I just put the names of all the researchers in the department on two sides of the paper and connected with lines, co-publications, just over the last 5 years. So this just represents 5 years of time between 2006 and 2011 co-publications, and I think it's pretty clear the degree of collaboration. And I've organized sort of by silos: molecular biologists, bioengineers and physicists, neuroscientists and pharmacologists, and clinician scientists on the bottom. And so not only are we doing cross-silo collaboration, we're also having tremendous amounts of real honest collaborations between basic scientists and clinician scientists, and I really think that is exceptional and always has been about this place. And the reviewers agreed. We got a 1.0 on the grant application, and a lot of people asked me what our secret was. I didn't tell them. The field of hearing science has come a long way in 50 years. I mean, it's amazing how little we understood about how the inner ear worked 50 years ago. And I had a front row seat to the discoveries having to do with the cochlear amplifier and outer hair cell motility and the transduction channels and synaptic transmission, and all of the hair cell specific genes that cause non-syndromic deafness that are involved in all these hair cell specific functions. And all along the way, contributions of departmental scientists have really been key. And over the years, they have evolved from very basic approaches, investigating the really fundamental basic science aspects, to much more translational approaches. And that was always one of my goals in taking over as director, and it was certainly shared by Joe Nadal, as well as Brad Welling and Mark Varvaris after him. And I think we've been very successful. I think probably, as most of you know, our principal investigators have been founders of many of the major biotech companies in the hearing space, and many of our trainees are working in these companies. And as I'm sure you all know, several of these companies have recently demonstrated virally mediated cures for one type of genetic hearing loss, as summarized in some of these headlines, transforming profoundly deaf kids into those with apparently normal hearing function. So, it's something we've dreamed about in the field for decades, and it's happened, just in the last couple years. And it's they're the first small but really real steps toward developing cures for sensory neural hearing loss. I mean, I kind of see it as right now we've got a little footpath through the jungle, but pretty soon it's going to be a super highway with on-ramps and off-ramps that are going to be helping thousands and thousands, if not millions of people. So it's a really exciting time to be in the field, and it's been an honor for me to spend the last 50 years at Mass Eye and Ear, participating to the extent that I can and observing, and I hope to do so for a few more years. So thank you very much.